On Ross page 151 in section 20.5, we come to a little particle that's going to be pronounced na. And what this is it's really an untranslatable particle that much of the time indicates a volitional idea. Many of the old Bible translations would translate it as please or I pray thee. Because it usually accompanies volitional forms. Some people have suggested that it softens the imperative idea, but that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes Yahweh uses it to command Israel to do things, and we wouldn't say that Yahweh is somehow feeling the need to mitigate or soften his voice of command or strength in that way. So I don't encourage you to translate it, but just recognize that this little particle is going to frequently occur with volitional forms, and it's really not translatable. Okay? That's all I want to say about that. You're going to see it here in our exercises. 20.6, we come to the matter of negation. Okay? How do we negate volitional forms? That should be an I. So with negation of volitionals. Here's the deal about negating volitionals. Okay? If I want to negate a volitional, I'm going to use all in front of the volitional form. Okay? All in front of a volitional form. This is a way of saying things like, may he not succeed, or may I not go down into Sheol. There is one issue related to volitionals that's important here. So all before volitionals, and then there's a big exception, except imperatives, okay? You cannot put all in front of an imperative to say don't do something. As well, you cannot put lo in front of an imperative to say don't do something, okay? Imperatives cannot be negated. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that Hebrew mamas never said no to their children? No, that's not what that means. They were not permissive parents. Rather, in order to negate an imperative, you have to do one of two things, okay? So, to negate an imperative, you're going to switch your imperative. Remember, the imperatives have no prefix at all. We've chopped off their heads. So if I want to say don't do something, or you shall not do something, I have to switch my imperative to a prefix second person form, and then I have to use lo followed by the form in the imperfect second person, or I'm going to use all, and I'm going to use a jussive second person. This is where I mentioned that we do have some situations where jussives can be second person, and this is where we're going to find it. What would this look like? Well, let's take the word shavat. Okay? What does shavat mean? To rest. To rest. Okay? So, how would I say rest, as in commanding a second masculine singular entity? I want you to rest. So, Johnny, rest. What would I do? What's the vowel point under the sheen going to be once I chop off my prefix head for the imperative? It's a vocal shava, right? And then the theme vowel is a holum. So it's shavot. So these are all going to be cow forms I'm going to do a couple of things for you. So the imperative to MS is shavot, rest. Okay? Exclamation point. Rest. Now, what if I want to say, don't rest? Don't rest. I have two ways to do it. I can't say lo shavot, and I can't say al shavot, because the imperative form itself cannot be negated. So what do I have to do? I have to switch to the imperfect second masculine singular. What would that look like? Got to put the prefix tav, right? Imperfects have prefixes. 2ms is prefix tav. So tishbot and lo in front of it. Or I could use the jussive, second masculine singular. What would that look like? Well, the jussive is going to look exactly like the imperfect. Okay? So it's also going to look like tishbot, but with all in front of it. So to tell someone not to rest, it's either going to be lo tishbot, lo plus the imperfect to ms, or al tishbot. Al, which also means the same thing as lo, not, but with the jussive. Okay? Now here is the $1,000 question. What is the semantic difference between using lo plus the imperfect to second person to prohibit something versus all plus the second person jussive to prohibit something? This is the difference between a general prohibition versus a specific prohibition. Okay? So, let me just ask you, if I wanted to recite the 10 Commandments to you and say something like, thou shalt not kill, which one of these do you think I'm going to use?
Lo.
I'm going to use lo plus the imperfect because I'm giving a generic prohibition about some activity. Okay? If, on the other hand, somebody is about to drive a knife through the heart of another person, and I say, hey, don't kill him. He's a good guy. What would I use? Lo or all? Yes, I would use all plus the jussive of katal. So all tiktol. Okay? So, let me give you another example. This is real life kind of stuff here now, okay? Because people stabbing someone in the heart with a knife never happens. But I'm talking to my little, toddler, 3-year-old, 2-year-old, walking, finally at the point where they can maneuver their way into the kitchen. And so I grab Johnny and I say, Johnny, you shall not touch the stove. Hot. Don't reach up there and touch the stove. You shall not touch the stove. What do I want to use? Lo plus the imperfect or all plus the jussive? No. Lo. This is a general prohibition. I'm giving him instruction that's supposed to apply at all times and all circumstances, right? You shall not touch that stove. Okay? Lo, second person imperfect. And then, as a dutiful parent testing my child, I walk away and leave him in the kitchen. And then I peek around the corner and I see Johnny. And Johnny starts to reach up to the stove, and I jump out and say, don't touch that! Which one am I going to use? I'm going to use all plus the jussive, because he's about to do it, and on that specific occasion, I'm prohibiting him from doing it. Okay? So that's the difference between general and specific prohibitions. Okay? Good. The bottom line is that in order to tell someone not to do something, you cannot put lo or all in front of the imperative form. And if you ever see it, you know what that means. It means that a a first-year Hebrew grammar student accidentally did it wrong. Okay? That's where that comes from. Now, because the imperfects and the jussives are identical to each other, when you're parsing and you come to a second-person prefix form that could be imperfect or jussive, how will you know which it is? Well, always look at the negative particle if there's a negative particle. If there's a negative particle, if it's low, then that's the imperfect, okay? And if it's all, then the all is always going to negate a jussive. Okay, so that's my little jingle. All always negates jussives, if it could be jussive or imperfect. Okay, all cannot negate an imperfect. So if you ever see all in front of a prefix form, it's not an imperfect, it's a jussive. All right, the last thing that we need to talk about here are the indirect volatives, or indirect volitional sequences. And for that, we have a handout here that I've given you on these volitional sequences. So what happens in Hebrew narrative is as someone is talking and giving instructions or whatnot, you can have some situations where sequences of actions or combinations of actions are mentioned one after the other. And there's three basic different types of volative sequences involving volitional forms. And we've got them on the handout here. This is summarizing the last part of Ross. Let's look there. Okay, remember in Hebrew we are reading from right to left. So the sequence, as I lay it out here, is going in this direction. So you could have an imperative verb in your sequence first, followed by a WCP form. Okay? So take a look here. We have Shema Yisrael. That is the Cal imperative 2MS. Shema, listen, or hear, O Israel. And then in sequence with it, you could find a WCP form. Here's the verb ahav with a vav in front and the ta perfect personal ending. And that's a WCP form. If I'm starting with an imperative, which has obviously volitional semantics, and I continue it in sequence with a WCP form, then that WCP form will have the same nuance of volitionality or commandingness, okay? So hear, O Israel, not and you loved. It's not a simple old perfect, but it's and you shall love. It is a volitional idea because it's in sequence with a volitional imperative verb, okay? So that's one type of sequence that we can see. Remember, WCPs take on the nuance of the preceding verb. So if it had an imperfect with the WCP following, then it would maybe just be future. But here it's an imperative. That's a command. And the WCP in sequence with it would also have a volitional nuance. In the second example, I could have an imperative in the first clause, and then in the second clause, just simply another imperative with a conjunction vav. So, imperative command and another imperative command. And this is just very simple. It's just a string of commands. Keep and observe. Okay? So I could see that kind of a scenario as well. The third part is probably the part that's the most difficult because we're now starting to pile on all these verb forms and prefix forms, and you may not see this for what it actually is. But in this type of a sequence, this third type, I have any volative. So what are my volitional forms? Imperatives, justives, and cohortatives. If I have any volative form in the first clause, followed by a regular conjunction vav, not a WCI, but just a regular conjunction vav, and any prefix form. What are my prefix forms? Cohortatives, justives, and imperfects all use prefixes. The imperative is the only one that doesn't use a prefix here, so we're not talking about imperatives, but any prefix form with a normal conjunction vav, then what will frequently be the case is that the semantics of the second verb in sequence is going to be purpose, the purpose for the first verb. So in this case, write, kathov, a cal imperative, ve'ezkara, purpose, that I may remember. Okay, I have a form of zachar to remember with the prefix aleph and a kamete at the end. That's a cohortative, but this is giving some nuance of purpose. Do this, right, so that I may remember. Ve'ezkara. In the second example, I have nishlacha. So this first one is an imperative. The second one is a cohortative, right? Let us send. And then I have a regular vav and a prefix form with a prefix yod. Ve'yil code. And that's going to have the nuance of purpose. Let us send that he may capture. And then yishkav, here's a jussive. Let him lie down, yishkav. Yishbot. Again, a simple conjunction vav, not a vayiktol. Yishbot with purpose, that he may rest. There's my prefix form. Okay? So a lot of students, when they see this, they immediately think that they're looking at WCIs, but remember, WCIs have a vav and a pathak and a doubling dot inside the prefix, or nutty consonant prefix, right? I don't have those types of vavs here, okay? So that's not what you're looking at here. And it wouldn't even make sense. Otherwise, it would be right and I remembered, because WCIs are always past. But that's not what we're dealing with here. It's right so that this action may happen. Right so that I may remember. Let us send so that he may capture. Let him lie down that he may rest. Okay? So these volitional sequences indicate when we see this, excuse me, these volitional sequences, when we see this, are indicating the purpose for the carrying out of the main verb. All right, well, let me stop there.